Hello guys, it's Orion here, and today I want to talk about Marx's Capital. I know it's a high volume book and it definitely hinders many people from reading it. Even sociology students like me are less likely to read it through. But this insightful book gives us very good reference of the society we are living on today. So if you don't have the time to read the original text, you can find the secondary journals as I did. I read this How to Read Marx's Capital by Stephen Sheffield. I'll try to explain how capitalists work in the Marxist perspective and, from my opinion, how we live in this spoiled capitalist society. So, reading Marxist should start from the divergent opinion between Adam Smith and Karl Marx. While Adam Smith considered that the accumulated wealth of nations through the perspective of free market exchanges, which involve consensual agreement between buyers and sellers who satisfy each other's needs through fair exchanges. In the classical supply and demand analysis, customers and producers both gain a surplus in exchange. Price is negotiated and determined through the total demand and supplies in the market. If the price fluctuated, then the demand and supply were adjusted to its equilibrium price. Adam Smith coined it as an invisible hand, and you might already know this argumentation. But did you ever question about the validity of this argument? If Adam Smith is true, then why in reality our market always fails and our financial system always fall into crisis instead of remain in equilibrium state? We normally take for granted that the construction workers from rural China cannot afford purchasing an apartment they built in Beijing or Shanghai. But for Marx, it is problematic if a laborer cannot afford the product they produce. And there's a systematic manipulation behind. Marxists figure that to understand a capitalist society, which characterized as immense collections of commodities, we have to look into commodities. How the value of commodities is created. What are those values? Marx claimed that there are two types of values: use value and exchange value. They are based on very different mode of production. Use value exists only if it is or it can be realized. For example, in use value perspective, a shirt worth nothing unless I wear it. A piece of bread worth nothing until I eat it and it transforms into energy and so that I can work and study. Use value is realized from the warmth, realized from the commodity to warmth, the energy that it provides to its users. On the other words, if we don't need or use it, it has no use value. And once the use value is realized, it vanished. The piece of bread is eaten and the shirt is worn out as we realize their use value. Exchange value, on the contrary, based on the market exchange between the commodity and value form. In our society, that's the money. We price an object irrelevant to another commodities in barter economy, right? Trading a piece of silk for a box of eggs. But it is inconvenience if it is not quantified, like how many eggs that I need to trade how many meters of silk. So that's why we created money and unified currency. It is exchange medium. A commodity has both use value and exchange value. In pre-capitalist society, we focus mainly on use value, right? Money serves as an exchange medium for convenience of trades. Commodities exchange for money and exchange for other commodities, which satisfies all of us needs. As Marx put it, CMC. Remember this, it is important. Well, in capitalist perspective, what we care about is how to use money to make profit through trade. The idea is changed and it is completely changed rule of the game. It looks like the same, like we have commodity, we have the money, and we have trades, but the sequence is different. Marx called it valorization of money. Money, commodity, money, and a profit. MCM dash. In this chain, use value of a commodity becomes a tool to make more money, and thus it becomes a trivial mean to an end. But where does the extra value come from? Don't take it for granted. Now we get closer to the core. So, how does capitalists make their profit? Here is the most important part of Marx's argument. Value does not come out of thin air. The source of value is the human labor, which transforming raw materials into usable commodities. You might not find this statement exceptional, but if it is true, if value does come from human labor, tools and money itself doesn't create use value, right? Then Adam Smith is wrong when he claims that trades in free market are fair. It cannot be fair. Think of it. If we all trade commodities at a price that represent true value of every link of the production, there will be no extra value. There will be no profit. Because the cost we buy the item, we buy the raw materials, we buy the means of production will offset the revenue we get. In the sense, we all both buyers and sellers of our society. Even we rip each other's off. The excessive price we earned from selling commodities will also be offset by excessive price we pay through buying commodities. Thus, if we cannot explain where those extra value come from, it makes no sense for capitalists to invest and reinvest because there is no extra money to be made if the trade is completely fair. Okay, to figure this riddle, Marx argues that there is a very special and unprecedented commodity emerged in capitalist society: labor power. That is a commodified form of human labor. We laborers commodify and trade our labor power to the capitalists for necessity to survive. Marx calls the part of labor for survival necessity of workers, necessary labor. And that is the wage we receive from selling our labor power. Well, what makes profit for capitalists is the part Marx called unpaid labor. That is, we work for capitalists and the part didn't get paid. That's how capitalists make their profit. But you might ask, what if I invest a stock or a bond and earn a profit? There seems no labor involved. Where is my profit coming from in Marx's perspective? Of course, Adam Smith's fellows will expand that the demand and supply analysis, there's optimistic expectation of a company's development. Thus, the supply of its stock is higher than its demand, which incurs shortage, so the price adjusts itself to surge. But where is the labor? In the post-capitalist society, the way changes for capitalists to make their first bucket of gold. It shifts from the violence to manipulation. Capitalists simply price something, claim something that has value. As long as everyone agrees to it, it has value. And the value based on agreement, instead of the utility, instead of the use value. So, as long as the profit are made, there's suddenly have more money in name come out to our society. So basically government will print out more money to offset those money created in name. And of course, those money created will raise all the prices prices of commodities exist in our society. And the price is, and the bill is split, if not evenly, to everyone in the society. Liberal economics argue that customer and producer both get a surplus through trade, right? Therefore, it is a win-win game, and it is justifiable to maximize economic surplus. In business world, what we call profit. However, the classical economic model frames out the production process. It considers costs involved to make profit as the rent rent for land, interest for capital, wages for labor. Big but, land itself doesn't create value. Capital, such as machine, doesn't create value itself. Entrepreneurship, since capitalist doesn't put direct labor in transforming raw materials into usable commodity, it doesn't create value. The source of value is always human labor. In Marx's formula MCMM dash, only the commodified labor power makes a profit. So the primary job for capitalists is to exploit labor as much as they can, to bleed them dry, in order to maximize the profit. Of course, labor class has already been widely stratified into hierarchical system. Now we have many layers of managerial position, which makes things more complicated than Marx's age. We might not think we are labor class, but we are labor. We are selling our labor power as a commodity to capitalists for survival. The logic is still the same. For Marx, there are two main strategies to exploit laborers for profit. So you capitalists, listen and show some conscience. But if we are labor, it's really helpful for us to understand in what way my labor is being exploited and my wage in what way being lowered in the long term. First, lengthening labor power. Push labor to work overtime. So basically it extends the labor time. So it creates absolute surplus value. But it has a risk because workers are human. We will revolt, probably even die if the pressure is too high even for us to sustain our life. In Marx's perspective, this is a reproduction. We have to make sure that we can reproduce ourselves so the exploitation could be sustainable. So the absolute surplus value has its limit. The second strategy to exploit workers, which is widely being used today, is to revolutionize mode of production. This creates a relative surplus value in more indirect way. Capitalists invest in new technology, invented assembly line to replace apprentice, where workers have full set of skill to make a final product, and divided manual and mental labor to make sure that capitalists can use low skill and low pay labor, such as children, women, and uneducated person. So this actually exacerbates workers' bargaining power for higher wage, because they used to be able to create a full final product themselves, but now they cannot use their skills. Their skills are not being valued because they are replaced by technology. In this sense, they are less likely to ask for higher wage because that's the bargaining power, right? So this increases the rate of unpaid labor, so does profit. For example, AI, like it's a trending topic, right? It's new technology on the table. Capital invested passionately because it can cut off employees and replace them with AI in the name of increased efficiency of our society, but actually it's also lower the bargaining power of laborers. If you are a laborer, if you're working in the companies, then you probably need to equip AI skills, lots of skill to re-educate yourself in order to not be outgraded by the capitalist society. Though informant technology are by its nature decentralized and democratic, the ownership of technology is politically slanted, and it's always slanted since it's invested by capitalists in the first place to replace laborers as many as they can when it's at its full-fledged. But there are potential crises in Marx's scenario. For instance, realization crisis. It happens when we produce too much or when labor doesn't have enough money to consume. So either way, commodity fails to realize into money, and the circulation circle breaks out and the whole system crashes, like financial crisis. It pains for everyone. Now let's go back to ourselves. What does insights in Marx's Capital have anything to do with us. We have to understand two ugly secrets behind capital that relate to every one of us. First, commodity fetishism. Second, primitive accumulation. Finally. Okay, let's talk about commodity fetishism. As we get used to focus primarily on exchange value instead of use value of commodity, which is actually given by human labor and social relations. What does that mean? Okay, on the other word, if there are no human relation, the commodity worth nothing. For example, the hat that Queen Elizabeth wore priced $1,000. You can put it on auctions, but its value is determined by the relationship between us and Her Majesty. Otherwise, if the hat itself were almost worth nothing. But in consumers' culture, we are persuaded that commodities have an intrinsic value. We believe that clothes make a person. People who grab luxury bag are more distinguished than those who don't. We forgot that the value of luxury bag comes from laborers who produced it and the social relation between us and the rich. You know, if you live in a cultural revolution 60 years ago in China, being luxury almost means a disaster instead of dignity. Eventually, we fetishize commodities and getting more and more superficial until consuming commodities instead of you pursuing our life purpose becomes the prioritized meaning of social life. To add, we also fetishize money as it is no longer simply an exchange medium to serve realization process of use value. In order to valorize itself, money has to be reinvested and secularized again and again until we believe money has a value within itself. In this sense, money becomes just another type of commodity being fetishized. But actually, we should be satisfied with what we get today, since we live in a world which is extremely rich in materials. We don't lack of clothes. We have fast fashion. It produces thousands of billions of new clothes every day. But we still don't feel satisfied. And the logic for capitalists is simple, because if we stop consume more, we will simply need and produce less. Capitalists will fail to realize the commodity into money, and of course fail to earn more profit. That's why capitalist society is filled with advertisement and propaganda, making us believe that we are what we buy. We have to realize ourselves by consuming. Commodities transform the way that we observe ourselves. It produces anxiety by making us accustomed to a certain lifestyle that is not sustainable. It persuades us that we have to have a university education, we have to get a good job, we have to buy a house, we have to get married, we have to have children, we have to do certain things in the certain ways at a certain time of life. But that simply is not true. So the second secret of capital is primitive accumulation. You may wonder where the money for valorization or reinvestment comes from in the first place. And if surplus value or the profit is unpaid labor, why laborers are willing to be exploited in the first place? Allowing capitalists to deskill our work, lowering our wages, hinders the way of our whole person development. The answer is simple. Workers are forced to sell their labors to capitalists because they have no choice. Legislative and military power cooperate together to take farmers' land away so they cannot farm and transform them into workers in urban places. This process today is always relatable to colonialism and global exploitation, either internationally or locally. Donald Trump says, "Make America great again." But what he doesn't say is, to make America great again at the expenses of well-being of racial and sexual minority in the United States, at the expenses of great amount of people live in the Middle East and Ukraine. It is morally questionable, and nobody can ensure the benefits are not be taken by capitalists who are running the state, right? So it is dishonor check. We see bloodshed in Ukraine and Palestine. Millions of people, including women and children, suffered from hunger and coldness, displaced from their homeland, if not died. Historically, the primitive accumulation of capital is the primitive accumulation of violence and the primitive accumulation of misery. On the other words, the first bucket of gold is the first drop of blood. While free market economics criticize against monopolists, in Marx's perspective, capitalism order is a monopoly. And there is only one way for Marx and Engels to get rid of it: communism. Marx and Engels believe Communist Party will eventually overthrow capitalist order and establish a communist production from everyone according to his faculty and to everyone according to his needs, which I find less likely to happen, unfortunately, in a large-scale social engineering. But if we look into our society, there are two sides of the coin, right? Many people are standing up and proactively supporting ESG approaches, applying UN sustainable goals, and running NGOs to facilitate tackling humanitarian crises arise from capitalist order, which make things less miserable in the long term. So I think we can still remain some hope and look at the bright side. So I hope you can see how capitalist order relate to us individually, though the topic of this video seems too far from our personal life. I might make other videos to talk about some more specific issues in capitalism that might be more relatable. But here, I don't want to be a person who simply criticizes capitalism but gives no solution. Though the system is too powerful and the agency in the system is weak, relatively, I believe we can still do something to resist global capitalism in the individual level, at least to make our life less miserable. So I want to propose 6 strategies that I will personally apply in my life. But whether you want to take it or you want to apply it is up to you, but I just want to share it. And hopefully we can resist these falling forces of capital and survive in the capitalist society. So personal action to resist modern capitalism. The first strategy is to reflect on consumerist culture and cultivate a minimal materialistic desire. To resist consumerism by training ourselves simply want less. It's really hard, but we have to pay attention for false needs that are produced by the system. At this point, I think of Lao Tzu, one of the greatest Chinese ancient philosophers. Lao Tzu says, 圣人为腹不为目. A master is one for the belly and not for the eyes. I think Lao Tzu will agree on Marxism's historical materialism. And when he says we should focus on the use value, we should focus on the utility of the commodity instead of the exchange value, instead of the symbolic meaning that is fabricated by the system, by the press. Before buying anything, ask ourselves 3 questions. I simply ask myself 3 questions. Why am I buying it? What need or desire am I trying to satisfy? And how was this need produced or imposed on me? This introspection helps us to uncover the artificial demand that capitalists build on. The second strategy to resist capitalism is to create the use value through our own labor whenever possible. Remind ourselves that true value lies in what we use instead of what we own. It's use value. We generally need only the basics: clothing, food, shelter, and mobility. Happiness comes from simply warmth, fullness, safety and freedom. And also from little things that cost little or nothing, like cooking, running, singing, knitting, right? By producing values ourselves with our labor, we remind ourselves that we have use value. We have labor that can create use value. And we reclaim the agency from the system obsessed with exchange value. The third strategy is to establish our own consumption principle, develop a personal code for consuming. When I determined, okay, this thing is really what I need and I have to purchase it. So if I can buy a second hand, I will not buy it new. If I can make myself or repair it from the old one, then I will not buy the second hand. But of course, I have to balance about the consideration of time, the relationship in the context and urgency that of the need. The goal of setting this consumption principle is not to live like aesthetics, but to become more aware of the need to be manipulated by the capital, strengthening our inner core. The fourth strategy that I proposed is to distance us from the materialistic community. We are immensely surrounded by groups that glorify, fetishize superficial exchange value. Material desires is the inflating bubbles. Those who chases end up nothing, while those who prioritize use value and spiritual fulfillment find true wealth. But environment really makes a person, right? Although I know it, I might not be able to do it. I should keep the distance from the communities obsessed with consumption and affiliate into those who value meaningful production to safeguard my inner core. The fifth strategy to resist global capitalism is to strive to be a good person. This is extremely difficult but essential. Moral standard, of course, varies from person to person, but the key is to act in ways that we believe is right and recognize when we strayed away from our own ethics. Like everyone, I think we are imperfect in our morality and we have limited knowledge along the way. So this makes being a good person really hard. But if we hold on to our kindness and honesty to ourselves and to the community that we care of, we can become a morally progressive individual in the long run, and it definitely deserves it. The last strategy is to pursue a lifelong self-education and reflection. In Marxism, real education is a life necessity for a human. It should be included in the wage of the labor. Necessary labor which should be paid. Capitalists seek to diminish this kind of education to extract more relative surplus value. And equipping ourselves with technological skills to avoid being replaced by the capitalist order, it's not true education. What I say true education is the self-realization and our own general interest. We have to keep on expand our boundaries of our world and put on more different perspectives. We must resist by committing to lifelong learning and self-education. It is not just for survival in the capitalist society, but to maintain a clear and dialectical thinking and sharpen a simple and honest intuition. So that's the end of the videos. If you feel like it, if you inspired it, or if you confused with it, please leave a comment. If you enjoyed, feel free to subscribe and share. Okay, so see you next time. Bye. Is always related to the colonialism.